Okay, I think we're good to go then. Right, well, I'm Julian Parfitt from Anthesis, so I'm chairing this session on measuring and managing retail food waste. This is the last in the series of Refresh Community of Experts webinars. Just for those of you who've joined, don't know anything about the Refresh project, this is a project which has been going on since 2015, looking at food waste reduction in the EU to actively promote collaborative models in tackling food waste. As part of the Refresh project, this community of experts has been created, which is a virtual platform to try and share knowledge, best practice, and enable those sorts of things to be replicated across Europe to bear down on Europe's mountain of food waste. So it includes useful tools and resources, and it's all about collaborative approaches within the sector. So please do have a look at the amazing resources under this community of experts. But to enable you to get the most out of it, you will need to join up, log in, and access the information. Also, hopefully, to upload bits and pieces that you think would be of value to the platform. So as I mentioned at the outset, this is the final in 4 webinars where we've looked at different aspects of food waste, drawing on expertise from the Refresh project and more widely as well. For those of you that might have missed some of the earlier ones, they're all recorded, so you can catch up by going to the Refresh website as indicated here. So who's going to be on the webinar today from our side, the speakers? So that's me, Julian Parfitt. I'm a technical director at Anthesis Group. I'm just going to be giving you a bit of an introduction to this area. Then we are lucky to be joined by Joost Snels, who's at Wageningen in the Food and Biobased Research unit. So he's next up. He's got an extensive background in looking at supply chain development with projects focused on resource efficiency and in particular in reducing food waste. So what we're going to hear about today from him is an intriguing methodology looking at a tool to help retailers gain insight in their performance in terms of food waste measurement and reduction. So that's Joost in the middle section. And then finally, we've got Tecla Castella, also from Anthesis. She's head of UK data analytics, and she's got wide experience of sustainability issues, carbon reporting, and also, as it happens, looking at food waste and measuring it, particularly in relation to the work that she's been doing for Tesco's across quite a number of countries. So she'll be in that final slot. So that's the agenda, a bit of an overview from me, then into some of the detail of measurement using this quick scan monitor tool from Joost, and then finally a case study focusing on measurement experience in Central Europe. And then we will have some questions, hopefully, from you, the attendees, and finally close towards 3 o'clock. Now, it is important that you ask questions. So you'll probably see in the control bar, there's a question box near the bottom of it. So please type in as we go along, and we'll collect together all of those questions and answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar, where we've reserved some time just to do that. You can also go via the community of experts to ask questions from there as well. So just moving over onto my contribution, I'm just going to talk in outline about why measurement at the retail stage is important. And I know that attendees are from quite a variety of different backgrounds, so I'm not assuming a particular level of knowledge, so I'll go back to some of the basic points, which some of you might be quite familiar with already. One basic point is the purpose of all of this, which is, of course, to do with improving European and global resource efficiency. Action on food waste is incredibly important in that respect. That's why there's a UN Sustainable Development Goal just about food waste, SDG 12.3, which has an ambitious target to halve food waste by 2030. And it's also a key priority for the European Circular Economy Package. I think many of you have probably seen this utilization hierarchy before, but the main message is to try and keep as much food as food, and failing that, high value valorization use in feed. The point in terms of SDG is that sending food to AD or recycling isn't a good use of resources compared with using food as food, particularly if it comes to avoidable food waste. So that's the overall policy context of this. And in Europe, we have a phenomenal food waste mountain. It hasn't been fully quantified, but it's not in doubt that it's on a huge scale. We think it's about 88 million tons. There's a great degree of uncertainty, particularly around primary agriculture, the contribution at that stage. For the purposes of retail, you'll see that it's a relatively minor portion at less than 5 million tons of the 88. But of course, retail holds a key position within the supply chain, both looking backwards towards the supplier and back to agriculture, and looking forwards in towards the consumer element, which of course is by far the largest. So that puts responsibilities on the retail stage, and because of the interlinkages that exist between supply chain stages, it's not about saying, well, that's only 5% of the blame, because of course it's a shared problem across food supply chain stages, and because the different stages interact, it has to be a shared responsibility to act on food waste. But just focusing on the retail part of it, this is a composition of European food waste based on various data sources compiled for a DG Santé study. And no big surprises that bakery, fresh produce, those are the two most wasted categories, and others contribute, but it's a pretty varied composition dominated by the most perishable foodstuffs. So in the Refresh project, we've looked at different policy areas in relation to food waste drivers, and retail has been a component of a number of these different reviews which have now been carried out. But one of the most important in relation to understanding how interlinked the supply chain is has been the work on food waste drivers along supply chains, where we've looked at mapping in detail the different components of the supply chain, including retail. So here is just an output from that Refresh policy work, mapping drivers at the food business level along supply chains. And you can see that retail, it's quite a complicated mix of factors contributing towards food waste across management issues, technology issues, external drivers and regulatory factors, and supply chain induced factors. So some of the things that really stand out are the lack of proper feedback loops between the food waste for those retailers that have actually got usable food waste statistics, and the feedback into their procurement and ordering systems. So that's an example of where we've mapped some of the drivers there in terms of the retail responsibility. In relation to whole supply chain effects, there's a challenge in providing better information along the supply chain, and particularly in some countries where unsold product is returned to suppliers, and so that doesn't appear in the retailer numbers, but appears at the supplier stage. So we've classified different drivers within the retail sector, built up a picture in terms of store waste and depot waste. But of course, it is infinitely complicated, the different combinations of management systems, technology failures, and the like. But from this, you can build up a picture of the drivers, but you can't build up a picture of how important they are in relation to the overall mountain of food waste. So just to finish off at this point, we need to be certain that we have ways of getting better data for the retail stage, both to strengthen the feedback loops between ordering systems and the waste that arises at the retail stage, but also to have better information sharing between retailers and suppliers, and for retailers to play their part in providing leadership in reporting on their food waste numbers in order to encourage their suppliers to do the same. And the overall picture is about trying to get better quality data to inform hotspots that can be worked on to prevent food waste. And part of that action is driven by the development of more effective food waste measurement, which brings me on to the next presentation, and what Joost is going to talk about, which is exactly to do with measurement.
Thank you, Julian, for this introduction, and also to showing the complexity of what we are working on altogether within Refresh. My 15 minutes I will address the measurement issue, and I will address it, as said earlier, in the point of view for the retailer in the western part of the world. So what we are looking at this moment is what we learned. Why do we have to register? So I can use the Peter Drucker saying, or his quote that is usually used and often used, is if you can measure it, you can't improve it. So you have to know what's going on. And what we learned not only during the Refresh project is that there is a lack of registration of waste data within a lot of supermarket formulas all across Europe, and also the right control information. So not only measuring and knowing what's going on, it's also important to know what to do with it. So they have to get into certain key performance indicators, and what we do, and that's what I come later on in this in my 15 minutes, is that we make the data visual. So show people within the retail what the data really says and what they can do with it. So what we did is we made a prototype waste monitoring tool. I will show some screenshots later on. It will be available, I think, in 1 or 2 weeks via the experts community of experts, so that everybody can play around with it and use it, and to see what you can do with it and what you cannot do with it yet. But I will show you the first insights. Just some, it's why retail, but also Julian addressed that already. As he showed earlier, it's when you're looking at the amount of food waste. It's not the biggest part of the supply chain where all the food waste and food loss occurs, but they fulfill a crucial and centralizing function within this food chain and this supply chain. And in that sense, they also have well, some obligations towards the rest of the parts of the chain to do something, to take action, and that's what we see they are really willing to do, but we want to give them also the tools to do it, and helping them with it. So what you can see is not only decentralizing function, but you can see when you look at the total within Europe, at least we have 30,000 retail outlets, supermarket outlets, but also in the way how they purchase or order, how they market their products, or what kind of discount policies they use. It all affects at the end, and that's why they are here in this world. What do we consume? What do we buy? But also what do we waste? So, especially to waste, it's more an indirect relation, but they have their influence. And what Julian also said, so the first speaker, is that they also affect the waste in the other parts of the food chain. So it's upstream and downstream. So in that way, they fulfill a crucial role. And again, they are maybe not the ones that have the biggest amount of food waste, but in that sense, they can maybe play the biggest or the most important role. And why, and that's the other thing, why retail or why supermarkets? And that's, well, it's not rocket science, but what we call, it's the daily challenge that they face. And that is the balance between so the availability of the product and food waste. One can imagine, again, it's not rocket science, but when you don't sell anything, you don't put anything on your shelves or at your shelves, then you don't throw away anything. And the other way, when you put a lot on your shelves, so people come in and they can buy everything at every time of the day, then probably there will be a lot of food waste. So that's one of the things they have to balance. So it's not the one or the other, it's the combination. To make it a little bit more complex, and that is why the retailers really need insight, is that probably the balance or the decision will be different per product or product category. You could imagine when there is a necessity, a product group that you really, it has to be there, like let's say milk or something like that. People, when they enter your shop, it must be there. So availability, probably you will weigh that higher than food loss or food waste. Or the other, when you have specialties, so it's a unique product, and maybe you can, as a retailer, it's not that worse or not that bad when you are sold out of the product once in a week or once 2 times in a week. So it even differs per product category, but that again you need insight. And then on the right hand side of the slide, it's a combined action. So it's a balance, but what retailers are looking for is both lowering food waste and at the same time lowering out of stock. So that is the challenge that we are working on within Refresh, and also what we think that the monitoring tool that we developed can help retailers with. So it's not lowering the one and the other one goes, improve the one and the other one goes worse or bad, but it's the same, it's the combination. So that's the main challenge. And again, it seems relatively simple, but when you have, say, 1,000 or 1,500 stock keeping units as a retailer with best before dates, with best use by dates on it, with different clientele coming and entering your shop during the week, it's quite a challenge. And steering that's what they do on a daily basis. So the idea is, and again, that's maybe not new, but that's in the center of this simple picture, is we want to have, and it's still there, a prototype, because that's what we built, but it's a monitoring tool that's using the food waste data, out of stock data and sales data. So essential data that is in most of the time available within retailers and supermarket outlets in Europe. And to use it to, first you have to define, but to measure and to analyze and then improve it. And then what I stated in the beginning, take control, take action. So it's a simple idea. Can we have a prototype monitoring tool that just gives insight to retailers at different levels, at outlet level, but also at headquarter level, that they can use sitting on the data that's already available? And I'm not saying that all retailers don't use it at all. So there are differences all over Europe, but in essence, they all gain or they gather the same data and they can use it as we think they should use it. So What is the monitoring tool all about? So it gives you an idea, but it is related to food waste and out of stock. So that's the basic idea. So it's the balance between the dose. So it's not just lowering food waste, as I explained earlier, or it's not only lowering out of stock, because the one is interacting with the other one. What it also does, the monitoring tool, it's looking at supermarket outlet level. So you, for every individual supermarket that you own, let's say you have 600 or 1,000 supermarket outlets, you have the information for a certain outlet, but you also can go to a higher level and see it in total. What's in it now, it's the in-store food waste. So it's the food waste that occurs once the retailer or the outlet accepted the product. So when you receive something and it doesn't match quality level, for example, and you send it away, it's not yet in the monitoring tool, but it could be in there. So what are the main reasons why things are wasted within the supermarkets? Often it's the expiration of the date label, so you were not able to sell it within the use by date or the best before date. Quality is one of the things that the quality level is too low, or there's some damage. And of course there's a fourth one, that's theft. Steal things, but that's often not registered and it's not in our monitoring tool. And this is, I just go through it quickly because then I can show you some slides, shots of the monitoring tool. It's what the data that we use, and what I underlined is the availability. So what we see, it's really, in most of the cases, it's data that's already within the systems. Most of the time it's the ERP systems of a retailer. So it's the sales, it's the food waste. Often it's in euros or in the other valuta that you have. Then it's the out of stock. At least in the Netherlands, a lot of retailers, they have the percentages of opening time per week when a product is not available. So that's the out of stock figures. And then again, we need some more, at least there is more data available, and we also put it within the monitoring tool to put things. So we needed some information about shelf life. What's the shelf life of certain products? And we can do some calculations. I will show later on. Was there a promotion or not? Because a promotion is really has a huge influence on food waste and also food availability, so out of stock. Geographical data is also there. It shows are there places in the country I am that a certain product is often wasted than another product. So that's also, that gives you more insight. And what's in italics, so it's the last, almost at the bottom, is that demand uncertainty. It's also what is the uncertainty about related to the people buying your product. So can I predict what my customers will buy? And most of the time also retailers have insight in that information, and that's also what we feed in the monitoring tool. So now screenshots. So the first one is don't try to read it, but that's what you get when once it's on the community of experts. It's the introduction page. It tells you a little bit of what the monitor is about and what you can do with it and you can't do with it. So, and there's also when you click here, you can see a document that gives you more detail, but it's at the end, it's we think more or less self-explaining. And what it does is two things. When you click get started, and now I'll use my cursor a little bit, you can first, it starts with comparing products. And now in the prototype, there are only 3 products yet, but you could imagine when you have 1,000 stock keeping units, then it can be 1,000 in there or even 1,500. So that's not limited within this monitor, but just for this prototype, we have 3 in it. What's in it is also realistic data. You cannot see what kind of retailer gave us this data, but it's realistic. So that's where we base it on. And it starts just by the insight. It gives you what's the product, what's the waste. So general information, what was the sales, what was the percentage of the sales that I was wasting, throwing away, and that's it's the availability. So what's the percentage, as I explained earlier, that the product was available or wasn't. Now, often what you see is that a table says a lot, but when putting it into a graph, it gives you a little bit more insight. And that's the first part of just visualizing your data. In this, when you look here, it's waste versus sales. It says something about what do I waste in a certain product and what's the amount of products that I sold. And it gives you a first idea. In this case, you see that here it's maybe hard. It's milk. We have a lot of sales in milk and hardly any or relatively low food waste. So probably that's not a product that I should focus on. When you're looking at apples, it's in the left-hand corner. That's a product that it's not the highest sales, but a quite high percentage of food waste. So maybe that's a product that I should, as a retailer or a category manager, I should focus on. So it gives you a first insight. And then what you are able to is click further. So first it is food waste and sales, but what I said earlier, it's all about the balance between food waste and out of stock, so the availability. And you put that in a graph, you also see that it shows a little the products are organized in a different way. And again, you see that the apples are quite in the right-hand corner. So they have a lot of out of stock, a relatively high out of stock, and also relatively high. Probably that's a product that we should take attention to. What we also build in this monitoring tool is that it gives you advice. It's static, as I call it, advice. It gives you just an idea. Where should I look at? So just putting the products within certain color schemes, you could say, well, when it's green, probably it's a product that I don't have to put any attention to at this moment. When it's in the red, that's something that I have to face on. When the monitoring tool is available, you can see what this means. I just put it in the next slide. So it's green, it's okay. Orange, something else. It's a high out of stock, high waste, and then we give some suggestions what you could consider. Consider between out of stock and waste by adjusting, for this instance, the replenishment level for minced meat. When we look at apples, you can see it's both. It's very high. Analyze the replenishment policy or consider even remediation. So, is it the product that I really need within my my stores? So that's the extreme, but it gives you an idea for what are the possibilities. Clicking further, once you know that well, apples is the one, then you go to comparing products and outlets. Then you can see all the outlets that sell for your retail formula that sells apples, and it puts it again waste versus sales, and again you can have waste versus out of stock. So then you have the same insight, but then on product outlet level. And again, you can click on advice. First, some slide. It is more than just, sorry for that, but waste and sales in this slide. It's also, it gives you some insight in out of stock. So the lighter, the less out of stock, and the darker, the higher the out of stock is. So it gives you a first insight on, well, it's a product that has so this is an outlet that has high waste. There's also not that much sales, and it's quite dark, so the out of stock level is quite high. So maybe that's an outlet that I have to consider, to take into account, or to visit, or whatever. What the tool also does, it gives you the opportunity, and that's what retailers really liked, we learned, is to compare. So there's an outlet, well, in this example, it's an outlet in the Dutch city Maastricht. And when you look at the sales level, there's also an outlet in the Dutch city Amsterdam that have more or less the same sales, but it has quite a lower waste. So you can compare different outlets, and then you can compare what's going on. So maybe you can visit them and ask the manager responsible for, let's say, fruit and vegetables, what does he or she does different, or how do they order? Do they order different? It's an opportunity to compare. We also put in an advice. It's at the same idea as I showed earlier. So it gives you, again, where should I look at? Green is okay, orange, well, not the first thing to take into account, but it's in the red, that's an outlet or a supermarket that I really have to visit. What's going on there? They have quite some high out of stock and food waste levels. Again, it's waste versus sales. Then you have waste versus out of stock. Then again, you can pick the same combination of outlets. Here's Maastricht again. It's the one with a huge out of stock and also a huge waste. So it's the one that's really performing bad. And Amsterdam, as showing earlier, that's not that high out of stock, and the food waste is a little bit lower, we saw earlier. And again, you can put in advice, and then you can see, well, I really have to address the outlet in Maastricht. That's the one that is selling apples in this case. What's going on there? So it gives you the opportunity again to go over there and to see what you should do. Again, the advice that's given. Once you decided to go to Maastricht, then the opportunity is there to click on that that dot, and then you get all the historical information of that outlet. You can see throughout the year or how long you kept the data. What was the historical data? What was going on? What's in July, for example? What's the sales? What's the waste? What's the out of stock? So the three main ones. It's not on this slide, but here underneath you can see was there did we have some actions? So you buy two and you only pay one. So is there was it available? So you can put it in perspective. You can see where did things go wrong. So it gives you also more insight. So that's you zooming into detail. And the last thing that I want to show is, and that's called here, is the fresh case cover. That's something. It's a calculation within this prototype monitoring tool, and it's a very simple one. It's but what it does is dividing the minimum order quantity by the average demand during shelf life. So again, not rocket science, but what it says is, once I know, for example, that I have strawberries and they have a shelf life of 2 days, and I have to order always 20 of them, but I only sell on an average on a day, I only sell 5, then you can predict it's possible that that will lead to food waste, or you have to discount a lot of your products. So it predicts more or less what kind of what product at what outlet will lead to food waste. And that's also a simple calculation, but that's also what we put in this monitoring tool. And you put it in a graph again, and then you can add advice as we do, and then you can say, well, once a product is I will just move on to the other one. When it's in the green, then the fresh the calculation is below 0.5, so that's no worries. That's okay. When it's in the orange, well, there still can be some food waste, and that you can see using this monitor, but just leave it for that. But when it's in the red, then we can predict that this sensor in those 3 outlets selling apples, probably they will have a high food waste of wastage of apples, and that you can find back again in this monitoring tool. So the tool is not only visualizing your data, it's also adding a little bit of advice. Again, it's a static advice, as I call it. So it's not really made and built on the situation of a typical outlet or a typical retailer, but in general, it focus you on it can put your focus on the places or the products or the outlets that you should focus on when you want to lower your food waste, and it also direct you or guide you in a certain way of possible interventions. So that was for me the last slide. So again, the prototype monitoring tool, it's now you saw just some screenshots, but it will be available within 2 weeks. So then everybody can just open it when they go to the Center of Excellence and click on it and see what they can do and cannot do with it. We think the monitoring tool provides you real ways and insights, and ways to reduce your food waste just by providing insights. We don't do heavy calculations beside of the FCC, but it's in general, it's quite simple visualization of data that's already available at most of the retail level and outlets. But again, putting them in the right perspective gives you quite some insight. And well, just closing off with the last quote, but I also started in. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. Well, we think and we really believe that you can measure it. It's not rocket science. It's in most of the people and outlets and retailers sit on their data. Just measure it and start changing the way you work. That's what I wanted to share with you all.
Okay, so thanks for that and for telling us more about retail food waste measurement. I'm going to move on to a specific example, so looking at the journey of one retailer in Central Europe, where measuring and reporting their food waste. So I'm going to start, if I can get to the next slide, that is. There you go. With a little introduction about the retailer specifically. So we're going to talk about Tesco and Tesco Central Europe's food waste measurement journey. So for those of you who don't know much about Tesco, it's, well, one of the largest retailers in the world. And it's present in 8 countries, including 4 countries in Central Europe that we'll move on to in a second. And yes, it's got over 51 billion pounds of group sales and over 500,000 employees, so obviously one of the largest retailers. And they have been the pioneers in terms of looking at retail food waste. So Tesco in the UK has been measuring food waste since 2014, I'm going to say, and they were definitely the first retailers to publish their food waste figures. They also have a number of actions and targets that they've set against all of their retail operations to halve their food waste in their own operations by 2030, but also to make sure that no food that is safe for human consumption will go to waste. And they're also working in partnership with their suppliers to halve their own food waste and also looking at how they can help households. So about Central Europe specifically, as we said, they operate in 4 countries, in Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland and Slovakia, and they have nearly 1,000 stores across those first 4 countries. And again, they were the first retailer in that part of the world to publish their food waste figures in 2017. On top of that, they have 2 ambitions, so, well, actually 3. One is to halve their food waste by 2030, in line with the rest of Tesco's targets, but also they want to make sure that by 2020, all of the stores in Central Europe will be redistributing surplus food to charity, and also that no food that is safe for human consumption will go to waste. So just a reminder that Tesco is really one of the main groups working around Champions 12.3 and Sustainable Development Goals 12.3, looking at halving food waste. And Dave Lewis, who is the CEO of Tesco, actually is the chair of Champions 12.3. So this is just a little reminder that the top 28 suppliers for Tesco UK last year published all of their food waste figures in partnership with Tesco, and this year there will be an additional top 10 branded suppliers who will be doing that. So Tesco's been working very hard within their own operations, but also really partnering with all of their big suppliers in the UK for now, but definitely looking to expand that to help them measure and report their food waste figures, but also work on halving those in line with SDG 12.3. So just a little reminder that there's 2 main ways really to measure food waste at the retail level, although there are more nuances and that we'll go on to in the next slide. So the first one is by looking at waste contractor data, so any kind of food waste, transfer notes that you receive from your contractors that are based on reported tonnage of collection. It might be a little bit more complicated for mixed waste streams, as you'll have to do compositional analysis to understand how much is food, how much is packaging, and how much is anything else that you are wasting. But the good thing about this method is that the data is quite readily available. So as we were saying earlier, it's good to start with what you've got, and it's definitely better to start looking what you've got already than to get stuck and trying to do things perfectly. But the downside is that it doesn't really provide much granularity. So you're able to see what the total amount of food wasted is, but you don't really get a good idea of where it's coming from or why or what. So the things that you really need to target actions for food waste reduction. Then the second method, which is the one we're going to concentrate on this afternoon, is based on product scanning, so more of a bottom-up level, which is basically based on scanning wasted products within store or depots and combining that information with standard product weights. And unlike what we said before, this will give you a huge amount of granularity because you're able to see what's wasted, when, where, and if your technology allows it, why as well. So you may have different reason codes for different reasons for wasting those products. The downside is that it requires very specific systems which may not be in place within a specific retailer, and also there's a bit of work required there to find the product weights and combine those with the number of units wasted. So an evaluation of options, again, as I said, there's pros and cons to the various different methods, and it really depends on what you're trying to do. Going with the easy methods where you already have the data is a great place to start because it means you can start measuring, which, as we were saying earlier, as soon as you start measuring, you start acting, but also you can't really target what you don't measure. So it's a good place to start, but the downside of that is that it doesn't really give you the information to hotspot or target real effective actions. So here we've got, different measurement methods where what has a lower effort might have a lower level of detail, and as you move up those methods up to the one that we're going to talk about today, that's where it might be harder to do, but it also provides more insights that will then help you to reduce your food waste. On this next slide here, it says understand who has the data, but I think we're going to go beyond that, which is understand who to get involved within sort of this journey to measuring food waste for a retailer. So you obviously need to talk to different people to understand where the existing data is, whether it's waste contractor data, whether it's any information you receive from your charity partners who may be measuring already the amount of food that is being donated, whether it's IT to look at, extracting massive amounts of data scanned in stores, or whether it's the product partners to understand how much a unit weighs, for example. So that's, you need to get various different people within the organization involved to find the data, but also need to get different people within the organization to be able to have the right resources, the right buy-in from senior level, and the right amount of money, etc., that you need to be able to do this, not just to measure, but then to act. So you will also be working with operational teams. Once you've got those figures, you need to get those people involved to actually reduce food waste. So I'm going to say here that Tesco Central Europe started measuring their food waste in financial year 16-17, and they are about to publish their latest year of data. So unfortunately, can't talk about the results for this year just yet. But all of the measurements are in line with the food loss and waste protocol. And what we see here is sort of the scope and boundaries diagram that's provided within the WRI resources, and shows us here what it is that we measure. So generally speaking would be 12 months of data, and we're looking at food and inedible parts, so both of those. And food waste is defined as those 8 colourful boxes. So any food that goes to AD, compost, incineration, landfill, or sewer specifically. Just a note to say that it doesn't include any food that goes to animal feed or to bio-based material processing, which isn't relevant to Tesco or retail food as much, but any food surplus that is sent to animal feed or charity isn't included within the waste figures, although it is published separately for greater transparency. And then we're just looking at all of all of the products that are sold within Tesco CE that are also food, and looking at the direct operation. So that's nearly 1,000 stores and around 20 depots across those 4 countries. So this is where we go into a little bit more detail on the method used. So as I said earlier, the method is based on a bottom-up calculation. So the way this works is that we get all of the scanning data across the 1,000 stores and depots in Tesco Central Europe. And there are a number of different reason codes against which the data may be scanned. So you can look at anything that's gone out of code, any damages, any food that is being wasted due to emergency product withdrawals, or fridge breakdowns, and customer returns as well. So there's quite a lot of detail there around the different reasons why something is wasted. And then the way it works is just that, you know, just like when you go to the till and you would be scanning a product that's sold, the equivalent of that is just that you scan a product that is being wasted. So we would know exactly how many units of a specific product are being wasted and why. Within, you know, we'll tell you which store, it will tell you what day, etc. So you've got really granular data. And then what we do is that we combine the volume data with a unit mass. So for example, we might know that 10 packets of rice were wasted, that they weigh ½ kilo each, and so that's 5 kilos of waste for that specific product. And then what we do is that we simply add that up following the hierarchy so that we're able to see that all the way down to the product level, but also by subgroup or category, you know, at a level that makes sense to hotspot. So it provides a huge amount of information. So really a gold mine of things that you can go and look at. And I should add that it includes, so we look at weight, but we also measure the amount of the value, sort of the retail value that is lost from not selling those items. So once you have all of that data, I think it's really key to say that, you know, we're not measuring for the sake of measuring. We are measuring because we want to take action. And so it's key to use, you know, that enormous amount of information that we have through these calculations to really target the right action. So looking at prioritizing, hotspotting, understanding what is causing the waste, and then tackling those drivers. So really what the detailed Tesco Central Europe data allows us to do is to identify the sources of food not being sold. So we can look at whether that happens within depot or whether that happens within the store. So already you know which parts of your supply chain, which parts of your operations you need to be targeting. But as I said, we can also see why they're being wasted, whether it's a quality issue or it's a damage issue. So I don't know, one good example is bottles of milk. The main reason that they get wasted is that they're damaged. So, you know, you can think about, you know, why is that happening? What's wrong with a bottle of milk? What can we do about that? And the next point here as well is that we can look at what is being wasted. So not just why and where, which are obviously really important things to know, but we can also look at what is being wasted. So in the case of Tesco Central Europe, for the past financial year, we can see that over 50% of waste is between bakery and produce. So, you know, it's pretty simple to say that that is really where you want to start. Those the areas where you can achieve the most and where you can, you know, make the most improvements and faster. So probably a good place to say that Tesco have been using this data to target actions and improve the situation. So between financial year 16-17 and last year, so financial year 17-18, the total food surplus at Tesco Central Europe reduced by 15%. And they did a lot of work looking at forecasting and in-store processes to make sure that they could achieve that. And then on top of that, they've also doubled the number of charities that they work with in that past year, which means that a lot more food that is not sold is redistributed rather than wasted. Which takes us into this next slide, which is a little bit of a reminder, and Julian showed us something around this earlier, that, you know, there's obviously a hierarchy of destinations, and the top priority here is to prevent. sort of the surplus from happening. So we can divert waste, so food from becoming waste, but it's even better if, you know, at the top level, we just prevent it from becoming surplus and unsold food. You know, that's lower cost for the business, lower cost in terms of buying resources, lower impact on the environment, lower cost in terms of having to move it to animal feed or charity. So really is the priority there. But where that can't be avoided, and as we were talking not that long ago, there is always that balance between having food that is in stock and avoiding food waste. And it's really difficult to achieve the right balance, but there is a bit of an inevitability of some food being wasted at the end of the day. And in those cases, we really want to try and move up that hierarchy into redistributing food to people. And if not, then we want to feed it to animals as a high valorization option. If it does get wasted, just a reminder that we really want to avoid anything going to landfill, and ideally sort of move up that hierarchy and create some energy from that waste. So a little summary here on a lot of the things that we've touched already and what retailers can do to lower their food waste. So they should really collaborate with their suppliers, whether it is to manage bumper crops or just to look at ordering systems. So as we were saying earlier, they sit in the middle of the supply chain, so they have influence, a very strong influence both sides, and they are a key partner. The other one is to redistribute to charities and food banks or send food to animal feed. Something that isn't really relevant, I guess, to food waste within the own operations, but in terms of working with suppliers, is to broaden specifications to avoid creating more food waste in other parts of the supply chain, and then improving forecasting and ordering mechanisms, and working on packaging. So, you know, there's a bit of a balance between using plastic or not, which we probably shouldn't get into here, but definitely looking at how packaging can, you know, increase shelf life and reduce food waste. And finally, just something we've sort of seen already today with some slightly different words in those circles, but it is definitely an iterative process. It is one that you should start doing with what you have available and then really work on improving on that process, on that journey. The sooner you start, the sooner you can start measuring, and the sooner you start looking at things, the sooner you'll be able to see where the obvious hotspots are, where the obvious things to do are, and really work on improving that as you go along. And even within Central Europe, I can say for sure, we've now done this for 3 years, and in the UK, I've worked with Tesco for 5 years, and there are improvements every year. We learn something new, and you know, we just keep going and keep it really transparent so that we can be held accountable around that, but also so that we can, you know, target the right places to reduce our food waste. So thank you. I think now we give the floor back to Julian for questions.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we've had a few questions. Sorry, we're a bit short of time. The first question, Tecla, I think you just touched on towards the end of your presentation, was about the interaction between the essential function of packaging, plastics, and food waste prevention. Yeah, that is a big issue to unpack, particularly in the fresh produce aisle, where there's quite a lot of damage to product by consumers. That can be a major cause of waste for loose products. Tecla, do you have any further insights in relation to that? I know it's a very tricky issue, and it might not be that the substitute is a loose product. It might be another form of packaging, of course, as well. I think also with some of the other food categories, the plastics packaging issue could cause extra food waste if we move to plastic-free aisles and there aren't good enough packaging substitutes. So it's a very complex issue. Tecla and Joost, I don't know if you want to add any more on that particular question.
Well, it's, how do they call it? It's a rabbit hole. It's quite a topic, but it's a relevant topic, so I understand the question. I know the answer is hard. So we do quite some research capability related to packaging. So for me, it's just you have to wonder. No, let's put another way. The package often has a function. So when leaving the packaging out, then something else has to replace that function. That can be traceability, it can be efficiency, it can be keepability, shelf life, and so on and so on. And for some reason, plastic is quite usable. Otherwise, it can be hardboard or paper. But you have to find out what is the function. So not always, it's not there just because it has to be there. It has a certain function, just to see what the function is. And probably there are packaging, some kind of packaging that you can just get rid of because there's new technology, or you can, let's see, barcoding, you can also put it, you laser it on your product, for example. So even tracking and tracing doesn't need packaging anymore. But keep shelf life, food waste, and package is quite an issue. And I think we just starting this discussion. In the Netherlands, there's the big retailer organization. They claim that they want to lower the plastic package with 50% in 2 or 3 years for fruits and vegetables. And after telling that, everybody was already shocked how to organize it. So it's quite intelligent. So no direct answer from my side.
We're almost out of time, but the very practical questions come forward on the burden to store managers and their staff in doing the type of scanning that the SKU-based food waste accounting requires. So, you know, how do retailers justify the time that it takes to scan the product that is wasted so that it can appear in the statistical compilations?
Yeah.
Tecla, do you have an answer to
Well,
that
I'm
one?
happy to say that I mean, in this specific case and in the other cases of retailers who do that type of scanning, that wasn't put in place for waste reasons. That all of that was happening already before we started using that data to do those calculations. So it's really seen as part of the operations, and all of that information is mostly used in the forecasting system by the broader retailer, and it was definitely a case of utilizing data that already existed rather than putting the systems in place for that reason.
Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave it at this stage because we've reached 3 o'clock. So I think, just to sum up, I think we've got into some of the details and complexities of how to get actually quite detailed information on retail food waste. The fact that the single number, the total tonnage, tells you very little, that you need to get into looking at what's going wrong with the systems in the way that Joost described and clearly illustrated in terms of those quadrants and the need for action when things were getting out of balance in terms of the availability and the wastage rates, and the detail that Tecla gave us in terms of just one case of a retailer, in this case Tesco. You know, we compile all of those data sets for Tesco, so it's not that we're promoting Tesco, but there are other examples out there as well. So just to finish off, if you have further questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to the one on meat, please post them on the Refresh Community of Experts site, and there is an actual way of posting questions on that site that have further questions to ask. We've got a slide here where you can post questions on that website, having created your account and logged in. So please, let's keep this conversation going and do post some further questions through that route if you have any. So thank you very much. I'm sorry we're a couple of minutes over, but thanks to everyone who attended. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.